Hi, my name's Sam Hall. I am co-founder and managing director of Emma. Emma is a not-for-profit social enterprise. We're based in Aberystwyth, and we exist to create the conditions where primary care in Wales thrives now and for future generations. Um, One of the ways that we are working towards our purpose as an organisation is through our role supporting primary care cluster working. And we host the All Wales Cluster Lead Group. And we've been enabling cluster engagement in the Accelerated Cluster Development Programme for just over a year now. So today I'm delighted to be talking to Dr Owen Thomas. Owen is a GP partner for the Tarian Group based in Aberdare and is also cluster lead for Cynon North. And my intention in this conversation really is to find out more about how collaboration across primary care has and should contribute to meeting the needs of communities in Cynon North, specifically focusing on the opportunities and risks of the Accelerated Cluster Development Programme. So welcome, Owen. Nice to see you.
Afternoon, Sam.
Thanks for taking time to chat today. So to kick things off, I'd be interested to hear a little bit about your views on collaboration in primary care and why you think it's important for the communities that we serve that the system enables you and your colleagues to work together.
Yeah, well, I think primarily it's about the complexity of everything that we're dealing with every day. Medicine has become more complex, conditions are more difficult to manage, and with that, the expectations of patients and services have gone up. Technology is fueling that. That's an area that we're lagging behind in the NHS, and actually finding ways to work collaboratively now, despite all the challenges that we face, I think is the only way for us to be able to provide a good service that is the same or to meet expectations across large areas. And also, I think it's important for our survival as general practitioners, if I'm being honest.
Great. And so just reflecting a little bit, so clusters have been around for 10 years now. So what has your experience been of cluster working over the last decade? You know, what has it enabled for you and your practice and your patients, and maybe what's been challenging or difficult?
So I think clusters as an idea it's really exciting, and going back to the original visions of what they were going to be doing, working collaboratively, sharing information, finding ways to work that we couldn't really before, and maybe taking a bit more control of things. That was a really exciting idea. I don't think we ever saw them develop in that way, and I think we got to a stage where everyone was a bit lost. Nobody really understood what a cluster was or what we should be doing, and as a cluster lead, it was a real challenge to get anything done. We've had to fight politically. We've had to fight for funding that felt like it should have been coming our way and seemed to have been diverted, or it seemed like a power struggle all the time to be able to do anything. There were plus sides for the projects that worked. We were able to work collaboratively with teams and other professions that we never would have been able to work with directly before. And I think that translated then very quickly and directly into better patient care, better ways of working. We found great people to be able to work with and great skill sets that we didn't have in general practice before, because it's kind of very focused around the GMS contract traditionally. But I think the challenge with it a lot of the time comes down to, well, the funding is very, very fixed. There's a lot of hurdles to jump through to be able to do it. It's not a very free process. And there's huge disconnects in actually translating what we're designing at a cluster level into who's going to be able to do it. And one of the kind of perverse things that we've had to deal with over these times really has been around the clusters have to happen. We have to turn something around in the clusters and come up with a plan and steer things. But there's then no mandate to be able to deliver on those cluster ideas that you come up with. And that meant that we felt as cluster leads a lot of the time that we were not only against it with health boards, but also that we were up against LMCs and GPC Wales, because it was like we were treading on the toes of the contract provision as well. And that made it a very uncomfortable and at times quite hostile environment. And that really did, I think, slow down and hinder the development. And it put a glass ceiling on what clusters were able to achieve. My hope is that through this group we can shatter the glass ceiling.
Well, and indeed, and I think, what would be really interesting to hear from you is, you've been quite involved in some of the discussions around the accelerated cluster development. So based on what you know about the possibilities that this new approach might bring into the system, how do you think this will deliver benefits for the people in your community and your patients? What's going to be different?
Well, what I'm hoping is that some of the things that we've really had to fight for, sort of information sharing, the IG frameworks, which have been a real ongoing challenges with that, as you know, with some of the meetings that we've had, but also the really amazing working relationships that I've been privileged to be a part of through fighting so hard to be able to build those things over the last few years. What I'm really hoping is that other colleagues, other GPs, other practices will be able to experience that way of working. The multidisciplinary team working in primary care seems to just be an old saying now without very much coming from it, but actually it's a very powerful way to deliver services, very, very powerful way. We know that meager investments in primary care give very big payouts because of the scale at which we work. So actually seeing some serious investment in primary care to be able to deliver this way, and for us to be able to steer it, not only means that we can help deliver on national targets, but it allows the services that we develop to take on a local flavour. Because we know geographically Wales is a challenge. We know that actually culturally, between different areas, there's quite big cultural differences between seemingly close neighbours in areas geographically, and actually it needs a slightly different flavour on how we develop those services. So what I'm really hoping that we'll see in the development of this advanced cluster working is that we can actually take a little bit of control with the budgets, that we could look at employing directly, so that we're not just working on short-term 6-month, 9-month, 12-month contracts that people can't get invested in. But I'm also hopeful that we can find some way of developing the business of delivering on these services in a way that the people that are coming in to provide the services feel invested, that it's not just a job that they turn up for, that it's something that they'll go an extra mile for to deliver on, in much the same way as we see the contracts working with general practice. I think it's a double-edged sword, going back to the general practice contract, but there is a lot of good that comes from that. We're invested as contractors. We have to deliver on those services, and we're accountable for doing it. I think if there's ways that you can bring in that accountability to wider services in the MDT provision, that is a huge step forward. And I think in a good way, I think it challenges the monopoly of the health boards. Health boards do a lot of good, but there's challenges in the way that they work. They're not quick at developing. They're not quick at adjusting. They're not agile. They can't be. They're too big and they're too corporate. If we can find a nice sweet spot between that development, where we're not seen as a threat to the health boards, but we can still have that autonomy to be able to do something and employ and work collaboratively, that's a very, very exciting prospect. And I think potentially this advanced cluster development work has the ability to deliver on that. It's not going to be quick and it's not going to be easy, but it potentially is there, and that's what I find really exciting.
Yeah, and I suppose you're coming from a place of, like you say, you've had the privilege of operating at the National Primary Care Board. You work in quite a big group of practices, so you've had some experience of operating in that kind of strategic space and seeing what's possible when you get into those conversations. And not all colleagues will have had that opportunity. And certainly from what you and I know about the Accelerated Cluster Development Program, I think the framework, certainly the option is there if that's what clusters want to do. I suppose from where you're sitting, what are some of the things that are worrying you? What are some of the things that you're concerned about these proposals that might be barriers to progress?
Well, I think it's worth pointing out, I mean, a number of the conversations we've had on the record and off the record with colleagues is, people are worried, aren't they? It's a bit scary, isn't it, when you go out and you're trying to do something new. And I think it would be remiss of me to kind of ignore all of those things. I am a working GP as well as being a cluster lead. I do have that side of the business that I've got to prop up. So I share those worries, who's going to deliver on some of these things, who's going to actually do some of the work. But unless we control those budgets, we'll never know. That's my view on it. And I think that it's right that we are cautious. Absolutely right. And this is a way of developing our businesses that we've never done before. It's looking at going outside the GPC contract. That's what we're familiar with. But what I find fascinating is the idea that we're not. There's an almost a feeling that comes sometimes talking to some colleagues that we're providing a purely socialist endeavor, that we don't do business development, but actually as practices we do. It was always well circumscribed, I suppose, by QOF and by the GMS contract, and it's a little bit scary to deliver on something that maybe isn't as well defined. But I think it would be good if we could find people that could look at defining what it is that we could deliver on, and then having a go at trying to deliver on some of those things as well. And that's what I think this is about. Now, I know that some people find that scary. I find it a little bit scary to think about, but I also find it very exciting. And that's what I find is a good drive for me to kind of think about these things. But we know from some of the problems that we've come up against that there's going to be some roadblocks against this. We know that we're still not entirely clear what clusters are, and actually the ACD stuff in a way has kind of muddied the water a little bit more, because now everybody's discussing it and trying to define what they are and finding the same issues that we've had all the way along, which is, well, where do they sit? So we need to do this sympathetically to the LMCs and GPC. They are our statutory body. The LMCs are our statutory body. They represent us from the GMS contract. We have to find ways of working that isn't going to tread on the toes of the GMS contract. It's not going to sort of reinvent the wheel. It's about finding that space. It's defining those spaces where we can do something well and deliver something that is useful, that isn't going to be doing something that general practices are already doing, and maybe is something that nobody else is doing, or maybe it's something that we could do better here than they're doing currently over there. And so it's bringing people along with us. That's a challenge. There is a PR element to this. Public relations is really important. Patients need to know what clusters are. That's not well advertised at the moment. What is a cluster? That means nothing to a patient. They turn up at a GP practice to provide a service. I don't suppose that they really care whether that's provided by the GP practice or a cluster or a group of GP practices. Our experience of working in that way has been very positive, but I don't think the patients care, but we don't know whether they care because we haven't really done that exercise to look at it very well. And then I think there's the ever-present issues of money. Inevitably, we are going to be seen as competition for the established bodies. That is the health boards primarily. They are the routes through which all the funding is funneled. They make the ultimate decisions on how it's spent. I don't suppose there is a way for us to do this without it being seen as a challenge. And so bringing them on board to be able to trust us, to be able to deliver on some of these things is a huge challenge as well. And then I think some of the other stuff that we've talked about already, Sam, we've been through, is this perpetual issue of how swamped everybody is for working at the moment. I think there's a fear of taking on more work. But I would hope that at some point we could see it as a way of, well, doing this here means that there's less to do somewhere else, rather than it being additional more work.
So what are within your locality and your colleagues within kind of North, but certainly even more broadly in the health board, what are your kind of next steps as cluster leads and a locality?
Locality is a challenge. So we've got quite an active locality. My locality is made up of the Merthyr groups. We've got the North Cunnan and the South Cunnan, and what we found is that we've been very naturally allied with the South Cunnan. At one point we were actually one cluster. Merthyr have always very much done their own thing. Everybody's on good terms and everything, but I suppose they're meeting their needs locally and geographically, which is the way that it's set out. I think one of the challenges for us is, well, how small is too small? So my cluster is currently 30,000. I'm guessing that's going to be a little bit too small to commission any kind of a big service. But working collaboratively with say the South Cunnan or something along those lines, if we can find a project that aligns, would be very exciting. We probably would then be big enough to be able to do something. You know, I guess it's finding common factors that would be helpful to do that. We still have a real problem with the IT in primary care. However positively it's painted, I'm afraid it is not up to scratch. And there's an ethos of development that is missing from the front doors of general practice into the GPs and then back out again. That's the bit that there's a vacuum where we need a huge amount of development to actually meet some of the expectations that are out there for normal service provision. So that's something that I would like to focus on, but I know that a lot of my colleagues are perhaps less interested with that. So sometimes it needs a bit of an approach where we've just got to kind of get on it and find a solution, even though not everybody realizes that there's that much of a problem. And that's a challenge in itself. But for me personally, what I'd love to see is a way for us to preserve what we've built. So, you know, we built up a multidisciplinary team. We called it the virtual ward. And it was very powerful. And I got to work with some great people, and we delivered some great services and kept people out of hospital. And gradually, those people have moved on, and they're moving on to other MDTs elsewhere. But I would love to find a way to retain those people and have control and have them invested in what we're doing to rebuild what we had, I suppose, along with some of the other service provisions that we've had, like dietitians, which were absolutely fantastic, and working on some of the pre-diabetes things, and maybe some work on social media. I'd love to see some of that, some engagement with the patients locally, and really get some patient support for this.
Great. Well, it sounds like you're going to be busy, Owen.
Always,
So,
always, Sam.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your very busy day to chat.
And
I certainly look forward to hearing more about the progress that you and colleagues make. And you know, just to say that, you know, UMA is certainly here in service to you and your colleagues to realise what we've heard matters to cluster leads, which is to build the autonomy, the coherence offer, and to support engagement with the system. So thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. And I suppose I should say as well, thank you very much to you and UMA for helping to bring this process together, because as much as the ideas were out there and the frustrations were there, I think you've given us a form and a shape to be able to take this forward. So my thanks to you too.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.